Over the past 25 years, researchers have studied how social and environmental factors can shape the health and well being of individuals or groups of people. But what is known about the role of these social determinants of health in brain development? Dr. Daniel Hackman is an assistant professor in USC's Suzanne Dwork Peck School of Social Work. He investigates how socioeconomic, family, and neighborhood factors are associated with healthy development across the lifespan and is the lead author of the recently published study on disadvantaged neighborhoods and brain development. Dr. Hackman, thank you so much for sharing your findings with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
You take a very multifaceted approach to your work in this area and have even harnessed virtual reality to examine the impact of those external factors. So let's start with this term social determinants of health. How does where we live, our social and physical environment affect our health and, for that matter, our mortality?
So decades of research have highlighted the fact that health is shaped by the environments that we live in. So societal conditions and upstream factors, such as socioeconomic factors, discrimination, safety, and many other factors influence health and well-being, both directly as well as by shaping the opportunities and the constraints and challenges that are available. And one of the important factors of this environment are the neighborhoods that people live in and that children grow up in. And multitude of research has shown that the neighborhood environments are associated with educational attainment, with physical and mental health, and as you mentioned, even with mortality downstream. And this is independent of a family's income or a family's socioeconomic status. There are a variety of pathways that could occur. It could be the social and services and supports in the environment. It could be the physical environment, such as even pollution or the built environment, as well as through stressors or other aspects of the social environment. In terms of child development, we talk about similar topics in terms of the ecological context of children's development, how children develop in a dynamic interaction with their broader context over time. And that means not only their families, but children and families are nested in schools and communities, neighborhoods, and beyond, all of which may potentially matter for child development.
Well, social determinants of health have been studied for some time, but very little was known about the relationship between the neighborhoods children grow up in and their cognitive function and brain structure. So tell us about the aim of the study and what makes it so novel.
Thanks. So although researchers have been interested in adversity and the effects of poverty and their association between poverty and brain development for some time now, the focus on that neighborhood context is novel and unique. And in our study, which is now published in JAMA Pediatrics, we really wanted to build on the early work in this area and address what we saw as four novel and critical questions. First, we wanted to identify if neighborhood disadvantage was associated with either widespread or more specific and limited differences in neurocognition and brain structure. So when we think about neurocognition, there are many different specific cognitive functions, and we felt it was really important to understand if the differences were limited to particular functions, let's say executive function or processing speed, or if there were differences across the board. And similarly, with respect to the brain, it's important to understand if differences are focused on particular regions or particular areas, or if there are more widespread and perhaps even subtle differences across the brain. Second, it's important in this area of research to really identify specificity in terms of any associations, whether the associations that we see are really about neighborhood disadvantage. So it was important for us to adjust for multiple aspects of family environments, such as family income and parental education, and also to determine if the associations that we see were specific to neighborhood disadvantage and not other important components of neighborhoods, such as how parents and children view the safety of the neighborhoods that they live in. Third, we wanted to test whether these associations were similar across the country. So not only do we know that regions vary from one another, but prior research has suggested that the role of neighborhoods may vary as well, but this hadn't been studied for brain development. And relatedly, we wanted to examine whether the differences were due to those kind of overall average differences between regions, or whether it was more about the local and relative variation in neighborhood characteristics within each city.
So once you pulled all of the information and the data together and analyzed, what what were the key findings?
Right, so we use data from the Adolescent Brain and Cognitive Development Study, which is this landmark study of more than almost 12,000 children and families from 21 geographically diverse sites across the United States. And my collaborators, Megan Herding, JC Chen, Rob McConnell, Doris Urbic, Bita Minarevish, and Kiros Berhain and I were able to work with the data on children's environments, as well as neurocognitive performance and MRI scans that allow us to measure different aspects of brain structure. And what we found were, first of all, that there were widespread differences in brain and behavior. So when we looked at neurocognition, the neighborhood disadvantage was associated with worse performance on nearly all of the tasks that the children completed. So they weren't focused on particular aspects of cognition, but really across the board: attention, flexibility, inhibition, processing speed, and others, things that are really important for children's learning and socio-emotional development. And similarly, when we looked across the brain, there were some regions in which differences were accentuated. So we saw that neighborhood disadvantage was associated with smaller cortical surface area in the frontal, parietal, and temporal lobes. But really, these were differences that were at the level of the whole brain. So the total cortical surface area was associated with neighborhood disadvantage. And similarly, when we looked at the subcortex, which is the region below the cortex, which is that outer layer, we saw that higher neighborhood disadvantage was associated with smaller volume, not in particular regions, but across the entire subcortex. So second, I mentioned specificity, and we found clear evidence of specificity. So all of the associations that I just mentioned are independent of family income and parental education, and they largely remain after accounting for how both parents and children are perceiving the safety of their neighborhoods. These associations are specific to neighborhood disadvantage. Third, in this large national study of neurodevelopment, what we found is that these associations were largely similar across all the different regions in the country, and that they were largely due not to how those regions differed from each other on average, but due to those local relative differences in neighborhood disadvantage within each city. So while future research is needed to identify if these associations are truly causal effects, it suggests a specific role for neighborhood disadvantage in widespread differences in both brain structure and neurocognition that are largely similar throughout the US.
Well, you noted that one size doesn't fit all, and disadvantage can mean something very different from one community to the next. Based on the results of the study, what was consistent? What was similar from place to place?
So this is a fascinating question because as we talked about, neighborhoods can vary between regions because the regions vary, but also what's associated with neighborhood disadvantage. The specific experiences may be different in different cities. What we found is that the associations between neighborhood disadvantage and the outcomes that we were studying were largely similar across the country. So whether the study site was in the West or the South or the Northeast or the Midwest, these associations were largely similar. And one of the interpretations that we take from that is that for those of us really interested in both understanding and supporting child development and neurodevelopment, neighborhoods seem to matter across the country. So whether you're an educator, a social worker, a pediatrician, a policymaker, or parent or community member, wrestling with and thinking about whether the neighborhoods children are growing up in are supportive and really let them thrive and meet their potential is important. The other thing to highlight about that similarity and that difference across the country is that what mattered most was how a youth's neighborhood compared to other neighborhoods within their region. So again, not necessarily the difference between cities overall. And so one of the important things that this highlights is that while that may suggest that there are certain common characteristics that are associated with neighborhood disadvantage that may be important for children's development across the board, there also may be specific local needs, local conditions, both strengths as well as challenges and needs that communities have, that both for research as well as when we eventually think about what this means for shaping and helping support supportive environments for children that we need to attend to.
Well, just how significant are these findings, and can they inform potential interventions from a broad perspective of childhood development?
And so this is a really interesting, important question. So these associations are small overall, but they're potentially quite meaningful for a few reasons. First, they can add up over time and across a population. So small effects, even across a population, can be important. But also, not only are neurocognition and brain structure potentially important outcomes in and of themselves, they also may contribute to some of those other health or mental health outcomes that we talked about in terms of their relation to neighborhood disadvantage. So they have the potential, we need to study this more, but they have the potential to be important for both short-term as well as the longer-term kind of health and well-being. One of the findings, so that's really important to note in thinking about the significance, is that there is considerable evidence of resilience as well. So many youth from disadvantaged neighborhoods outperform their peers from more affluent neighborhoods on these tasks measuring neurocognition. And many also have larger cortical surface area and larger subcortical volumes as well. So in other words, living in a disadvantaged neighborhood, it's not deterministic. It doesn't automatically predict any pattern of neurocognition or brain structure for any individual. We're talking about smaller population level effects that highlight the importance of thinking about the neighborhoods that all children are growing up in, not just focusing on any particular group, and really helping to understand how those different environments might help children thrive. So when we then think about the implications for intervention, one thing I want to highlight is this was not an intervention study, right? So we're not able to really speak to which interventions might be most effective. But the results do have some implications around our hypotheses for what might be most promising. And the primary implication, then, if we think about those themes about specificity and widespread differences, are that neighborhoods do seem to matter independently of other factors. And they matter similarly across the country related to those local neighborhood conditions. And so it suggests that a narrowly focused intervention, for example, on particular cognitive skills, may not be as effective as really focusing more broadly on the children's contexts and the neighborhoods and the environments in which they're growing up in. We know parents and families are working hard to provide the best for their children so they can thrive. And so we think one of the main implications is that it's also important for us to think then about investing in neighborhoods and helping improve neighborhoods and helping meet the needs of local communities, empower local communities to be able to have those needs met and their strengths built upon, to really provide those contexts that will then help families and children thrive and meet their potential.
Well, you make some very strong points about where we do go from here. If circumstances change, can neurocognition improve? Can addressing the disparities help to change the course for kids across North America?
This is such a great and important question. And to address it, it's really important to look back to the broader literature on brain development. And one of the really important themes, which is what we often talk about as plasticity, the fact that children's brains and their behavior as well can change and grow in response to learning and experience. And so there's every reason to believe that that continued change and plasticity is possible, and that these investments and interventions that I'm talking about in the neighborhood environments and in social conditions and social contexts that buffer the effects of adversity can be successful. And this is a really important area of future study. If we look at the broader research on neighborhoods and child development, there is evidence that changing neighborhoods, such as through moving or also investing in neighborhoods in a variety of different ways to address community needs, can actually have an important impact not only on the social environment, but also on health and well-being as well. So while the specifics may differ for different outcomes, and it really highlights the fact that we need to do more research in this area, it does highlight the fact that there's every reason to believe that plasticity will be what we observe. And so we need to continue to examine and understand that to see which types of investments and which types of improvements in local communities and meeting which needs and building on which strengths really can foster that health and well-being for all children.
Well, there is work to be done to secure equitable opportunities for all children. Dr. Hackman, thank you so much for sharing the findings of this important study with Newspoint 360. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.